Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Mikhail Thorpe, and this is the Expat Money Show. Today's guest is a traveler, market researcher, and internationalization author. Originally from the United States, he has traveled to around 90 countries and lived in more than 10 countries. In his travels, he focuses on exploring lesser-known destinations and finding unique and compelling lifestyle opportunities across the Middle East, Eurasia, Eastern Europe, and more. Please welcome to the show my dear friend, Brian Greco. Brian, how are you?
Great to be here.
Well, this is an episode long-term in the making. I've been over to visit you multiple times over in Istanbul and Turkey. Today, you're not in Istanbul. I believe you're in South Africa. I'm super excited for today's conversation. I want to hear what you've been up to, and should be a really good conversation. To start us off, maybe give us a little bit of background, a little bit backstory on how you got into this type of work and why you're so passionate about it.
Yeah, thanks so much. So I've been traveling now for about 10 years. I'm originally from the United States. I developed an interest in the world from a young age. And what I discovered was that in addition to travel, there was also a lot of really compelling ways of living, ways of thinking, ways of being that I could find through my travels. So I just started to move my way into, where could I live? What languages could I be learning? How could my life be better abroad? And I think a lot of folks can relate to this, search for where do I belong? Where do I fit in better? Where do people operate and think the way that really resonates with me? So my frame with travel was always about lifestyle, personal improvement. And then I discovered that there's an entire industry around residency, citizenship, investing abroad, reducing your cost of living and getting better service in doing so. There's a lot of really cool opportunities that you explore and that, your listeners are really keen on. So I kind of fell right into that world and I started working abroad full time. I started advising people on their international strategy. I've worked with companies like IMI, Investment Migration Insider, on hosting events and writing news and articles about the industry. So this has been a personal passion of mine for quite some time. I've lived abroad for most of the last 10 years. I've spent a lot of time in the Middle East. I've spent a lot of time in Turkey. And so I'm excited to share my perspective and hopefully invite folks to look a little bit beyond maybe some of the more traditional destinations people go to, which are great, but there's also a lot that people may be ignoring or maybe have misconceptions about. So I love to challenge the beliefs. I love to show people a little bit of a contrarian perspective, particularly around this kind of rising trend around, the BRICS countries and the shift away from the West and from Western Europe into more of the Eastern powers. And I love to explore those regions and share my adventures with people on social. So that's kind of my background and how I got into this stuff.
Well, I can definitely resonate with you on the lifestyle aspect, because when I started traveling almost 25 years ago, it was just like, I wanted to go out there and explore and see the most different things possible. Sure, one of my first trips was, Western Europe, but after that, it was everywhere that people don't go. My bulk of my travel has been to countries that no one else has ever been to or heard about, or, let's say the general public don't often visit. I remember going to Morocco when I was 19 years old for 2 months, backpacking around the country in, what was that, 2001 or 2002 or something like that. That just was not something that was often done back in those times. So I definitely resonate with you to go out there and explore not just the world, but, countries that people might not think of as the first destination to go to.
Well, exactly. And there's kind of this style of travel that's become far more popular in the post-COVID era, but has its origins really as far back as the birth of things like Airbnb or Uber or these different self-service platforms that have made solo travel in an extended format really accessible to almost anybody. I mean, you can really develop a lifestyle that of your own choosing in different cities. So this is something that I embarked on right out of school. I studied abroad a lot during university years and regional travel that kind of got my interest going, particularly in China. I spent time in Shanghai. And so I definitely agree that there's more people could be doing, there's more people could be seeing in terms of destinations. So I'm excited to share about any particular ones that people are curious about, as well as tying this into what is your international strategy? How do you divide up your time? As we become more global and mobile, questions about what is happiness? What is a good life? Do you spend time in three cities? Do you just live full time in one? Do you go travel, ongoingly out of a suitcase? These are things that are actually serious questions in today's world because people are looking for what's that template, because we don't just have our own 20 kilometer radius to live in. We want, to see this planet. And it's not without some trial and error that we find that right formula. So spend a lot of time thinking about those types of questions.
Well, it's really interesting because today's trends with these globalists and technocrats and things like that, they want a lot of this 15-minute city. And I'm like,
right.
This is the exact opposite of anything I could ever imagine. I'm like you. I have different bases around the world, places that I like to spend time. You can think of it as flag theory, like different playgrounds around the world. Like for me and my wife, we've really figured out, for the next decade, it's Panama, Istanbul, and Brazil. These are our three places that we just absolutely go crazy for, love it. And then those are excellent bases to travel out from and explore many other places. We might add in the future something back in Southeast Asia, but there's still some problems over there that we're not really happy with at the moment, but we might have one like that. But this little triangle of places of our happy place to live our best life, I think that people should be looking at. And it's interesting because I have private clients right now who are in their 50s, 60s, maybe not quite 70s, but definitely people who are doing this, like have three different bases around the world, sold their primary residence back home in Canada, the United States, took that $1 million of equity out of their home and bought a couple properties overseas. And now are traveling freely between them. And it's like, that's awesome. This type of, I'm not a big fan of the word digital nomad, but I mean, it's probably as close to what we can get. It's like a retired digital nomad trifecta. I don't know what to call it, but it's becoming more and more available and easier to do. And each country, or each jurisdiction is going to speak to different people.
Well, and I think what's exciting is finding what I call that medium term travel. It's a lot more accessible to people because I think in this space, there's a lot of people who say, ditch everything and go on the road full time. For a lot of people, that doesn't work. But the alternative of not exploring and seeing what's around the river bend, so to speak, is also not going to work because people have that curiosity. And I love the art of what I call 1 to 3 month stays, as well as potentially, a year or two in a deep dive of one particular place. And I've done that over the course of the past 10 years. And I've done deep dives in probably 3 or 4 cities I could really say I really, truly know. And then I have about 10, 15 other cities that I've been to either. I think, kind of that medium term is either visiting a place, let's say 5 to 10 times over the course of a period of time, or spending at least 90 days uninterrupted, really getting to know where's your supermarket, where's your gym, where's your friends, going out to dinner, seeing somebody again, waving to the security guard at the hotel. It's like things like this. It's that feeling of familiarity. And then you have a little bit of ownership of that space. And then when you come back 2 years later, it doesn't feel foreign. It doesn't feel like the world is so big. So I think medium-term travel is something I really invite people into, especially those who are not sure if they want to fully pull the plug and just, leave forever. Because there really is, it's never forever. It's always adjusting what is best given the global circumstance. There's been periods of time where it's been really great to be in Turkey. There's been periods of time where it isn't so hot and maybe you want to find something else. There's been periods of time in Europe that are amazing. So constantly monitoring that and having the flexibility to be able to activate those different home centers is really one of my themes.
Well, I definitely agree with that because I think that there is a understanding of a place that you're going to get through this, for lack of a better word, osmosis, just slowing down and just allowing yourself to become accustomed to it. Like we just got back from about a month in Chile, in Santiago, and it was a place that I've never been to before. And, we did birth tourism there. So I think everybody on my podcast knows, we just had our third child and we decided to fly to Chile a couple of weeks. Well, for my wife was a couple of weeks before the baby was born. For me, it was about 24 hours before the baby was born. Cut it a little bit close there, but that's another story. But, like you said, we found our favorite coffee shop. We found the park we like taking the kids to. We've realized how to use the transport and the Ubers. And I got a little office space out of WeWork and I was going to the office every day. And well, all of these types of things. And it's like, the nuances of the city or of the country really came through, not in a day or in a weekend or a week or something like that. It took a few weeks to start to scratch the surface and get to know things. And exactly like you said, just even saying hello to people on the street or, your security guard or something like that, you start to get a feel for the differences, the culture, the language, the food, the restaurants, everything like that. So I like travel, definitely go to a place, visit it, see the sightseeing, but you're going to get a richer experience if you can slow down a bit.
Well, and it makes it feel more part of your life instead of this temporary escape or temporary exit from your norms. When you are long term in a particular place or medium term, it is really the best of both because you aren't necessarily subject to some of the long term problems like living there for 20 years and getting frustrated, but you're also not in a rush. And the way I see trips is I'd say there's four basic lengths of a trip, or really three for a trip, and then one would be full time. You can have like a 3 to 5 day trip. You can have a 2 weeker or 10 to 14 days, and then you can have 30 to 90 days. And really, all of those things have very different content inside of them. If you are, for example, somewhere for 3 days or under, you want to just do the best thing, take some photos, and there's nothing wrong with that. We all love a layover in London. We all love, going and seeing something for just to scope it out. All of that's great. Travel guides exist for that. 10 to 14 days. Similarly, there are itineraries that you can fill your period of time with. But at about the 14-day mark, you have things you need to do. Unless you are just fully retired and have tons of time in your hand. A lot of us are working. A lot of us are working remotely. We have projects. We have personal things we need to do. Going to see a trainer, going to see, a tutor for, taking care of kids, these types of things. So at about the 10 to 14-day mark, that is the point at which the place that you're in must be viable for your actual life. And that is actually the most exciting part for me, because making a place viable for your daily life is what this lifestyle strategy is about. It's not about entertainment per se. I mean, entertainment's great, but it's about, do you know how to meet your needs and to explore your social horizons in that destination? And only at that point can I personally feel like I can say that I know a city. And this is very common. I for example, I have a friend who has traveled far wider scope than anyone I know. Literally been to every country, I think almost twice at this point. And very knowledgeable, would never, question his knowledge of the world. But I've often wondered, like, have you ever stayed somewhere for, 90 days, or have you lived in a city? And I'm sure he has, but there are other people I meet who, they've never actually been abroad for more than, let's say, 2 weeks. And I find that a completely different skill set. Again, no right or wrong here. It's just, I think somebody who's spent let's say somebody's been to 10 countries and they've been 1 to 3 months in those 10 countries. And the other person's been to 50 countries and they've never spent more than 10 days in a single city. That is a completely different skill set. And I really think in this space, those folks who choose to, there's this obsession, almost like a competitive eating contest that happens in international strategy, where everybody's, I got to go here, got to scope this one out, got to check here, got to buy a property here, it's like, actually, it's completely okay to be a master of 5 cities and to really have a very vivid life in all of those. Have friends you can call. I mean, and there's an opportunity cost. I mean, if you're always on the road, you are missing those daily moments and those boring moments that can actually be what you remember the most. Like you're saying in Santiago, just sitting down in a park, and that can be far more memorable than 10 days of touring.
For sure. And it's interesting because a lot of the infrastructure is in place now with things like Airbnb. Like I've gone on and rented an Airbnb for 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, or something like that. Full fleshed out kitchen, living room. You sign into your Netflix. You've got your parking space, rent a vehicle, or use an Uber Black or something like that. And you get to have like a little mini life there, but you didn't need to bring all of your stuff, right? Like it's like you bring your clothing and your toiletries and you're pretty much like set to go from day one. You had said like the 3 levels, and then the bonus level, or the extra, the +1, is the expat lifestyle. That's what I have in Panama. I have a 4,700 square foot penthouse apartment. There was no furniture here. We had to completely furnish it. We've got a beach house here. We're buying another house here. I mean, like, this is kind of that next level, but we've been here for 5 years. We spend the majority of our life here. But this, 30 to 90 days, even a little bit more I've spent in some places, is such an amazing, sweet spot, because you don't need to you're not in that place long enough that you need to purchase your own furniture, bring all your books or bring all your favorite cooking frying pan or whatever like that. You could just, get by with the stuff that's available in the gig economy or the sharing economy. But yeah, it doesn't get to a place where it's frustrating because you don't have your own things. It's like, yeah, it's that sweet spot between all of it, I would say.
I think folks that, if the opportunity is there to try all of those types of travel, because there are certainly places that don't need more than 3 days. There are certainly places that a 10 to 14-day trip. For example, in my own life, I've really gotten comfortable with accepting that certain regions are not that important to me. And it doesn't mean I won't visit them, and it doesn't mean I wouldn't like to see them at some point. But I think at a certain point, I think about the let's say 10-year level max, if you're traveling full time, you start to know your limits and what you love. And, you have to have enough of a catchment area to really determine that. So, I think there's a minimum amount of travel that's needed to really assess what you really like. For example, I would have never expected 10 years ago that I would end up loving Istanbul so much and make that my full-time home for the many years that I did, and that was just part of that is trial and error. And part of that is, discovering that you like a destination because of what you learned in a prior one. For example, some people may start Latin America in Panama, and then they will quickly discover Colombia. And then, so it's like, there's a little bit of there's a branching out. But I do think that, once you try those types of travels in different places, just eliminating certain things and eliminating this kind of wonder or that buffet mentality. Like you mentioned in the beginning, my focus really is the Eurasian continent. So to me, that is Eastern Europe, the Stans, Turkey, Middle East, Arabian Peninsula, North Africa, basically all the kind of the old world, if we want to use a colonial historical term. These are the civilizations that have existed for, in some cases, 5,000-6,000 years. They have very vivid and developed linguistic cuisine or linguistic tradition, food traditions, architectural traditions. And so for me, that has always been or not always been, but became my interest after I realized, for example, like me personally, Latin America has not been a focus region. I am going to Brazil later, so maybe I'll see you in Brazil.
Amazing.
But Brazil is one exception there. But like the Americas are not my focus, or Australia, for example, is not my focus. And even parts of Asia, like Southeast Asia, I've never been as compelled by that as I am, for example, China or the Stan countries. So I think everybody should kind of find their if we want to call it like 1,000-mile radius or whatever the zone is, and make that your expertise. And it really allows you to slow down the travel a little bit. It allows you to maybe gain a particular edge in knowledge of that region and maybe, start businesses there or invest in that region. So that's been my focus. And I love to break people's stereotypes about that region, particularly Muslim countries. I've really taken quite a liking to the hospitality in that region. I know you've had a great experience as well. And so I love people to, peer out into the distance a little deeper and say, maybe, particularly from America, there's a lot of wrong things that people believe about, and I'm happy to state that because it is wrong. I mean, there are lies that are told, deliberate things that are told to forcibly characterize certain regions of the world as inherently backwards or not to be visited. I think my contrarian side got me to, that was that original carrot that got me to see for myself. And then the rest unfolded just from the destinations that speak for themselves. There's so much to see there.
Well, I lived in the Middle East for almost a decade, and I used to get the funniest looks from people when I told them where I lived. And I swear to God, going through their head was like, oh my God, he lives in Baghdad. Like that was, and I'm like, I live in Abu Dhabi. It is a modern, safe, international city with connections everywhere, amazing shopping, lifestyle, people from all over the world. It is like one of the biggest, Abu Dhabi and Dubai. There's got to be more expats between those two cities than any other cities on planet Earth. I swear to God, like 90% of the population is foreigners. That means only 10% is locals. So you are meeting people from every corner of the earth every single day. And it was just so wild to watch my daughter play with kids from Kazakhstan and then Uganda and then South Africa and then El Salvador and just like everywhere in the world. And I'm like, this is rad. Like, I just like being in a, an expat hotspot, or, a place that people come from all over the world for a better life. And it doesn't matter if you're, from Bangladesh coming for a better life, or you're a Canadian or American coming for a better life. We're all going for the same thing. We're all searching for, a little bit of improvement, a bit more freedom, economic prosperity, these types of things. But you are absolutely right. A lot of people really don't understand the Middle East. And I don't blame them. If you don't go over there and see it with your own eyes, it can be difficult. If you just watch CNN or Fox News, they're not going to tell you the truth. I mean, this is the opposite of what they're going to do. And the brush that they paint all of these countries with, it's not the same. Like, it's just not.
Well, and it's also going to depend, for example, at what point you are in your life. What are your priorities? For me, as somebody who is off, usually a solo traveler, I love to socialize. I love to meet people. I found a warmth and an excitement. There's a nightlife culture. There's a tea culture. I mean, these are things that you could replicate the product. You could import the products, or you could maybe meet someone, but it's not the same unless you're in that environment. For example, in Turkey, there were many aspects of that society that activated parts of life for me that I didn't even really think I liked or knew about. For example, I never was little small example, never was like an animal person. Well, in Turkey, there's cats everywhere and
Is
dogs.
there ever? Oh my God.
Right. And I had never, to be honest with you, I never had a cat, I never had a pet growing up. I never really interacted with animals in that native, that natural format. They're just hanging around the city. They're well fed. They're clean. There's veterinarians that go around the city. So, this is part of Turkish culture. It is deeply embedded in the Turkish worldview. It goes back to the nomadic traditions of Turkic peoples. There are, spiritual elements to the cat and the eye of the cat and things like that. And, you think, oh, okay, yeah, whatever. There's cats. Okay. Well, year one, I would put up with them. Year two, you start taking photos of them. Year three, you pet one or two. By year 4 and 5, I mean, I'm like a cat person now, and this is something that environment brought to me, a little thing, or maybe, for example, and this is one thing I'm famously criticizing about Western Europe, which has its perks. But for example, in Western Europe, things close very early. And this, of course, there are exceptions, parts of Spain or something, but, German speaking countries, the majority of Western Europe, et cetera, things operate on a particular timeline. You go to work at a certain time, you shop at the supermarket, not on Sundays, because apparently it's still 1752 and we have to close the supermarket on the Sunday. Sorry. And, and it's like, okay, so we have a schedule that society follows. Now, some people really resonate with that. And there's a certain Epicurean element to that. This is time for dinner. This is time for coffee. But as you and I both know, sometimes we're working late. Sometimes we have guests who have different needs. Sometimes we just don't want to have to eat dinner at 5:30 before the little restaurant thing closes, and we want to eat at 11:30 because we were out all day. So that there's almost like, there's hard freedom and then soft freedom. In that society, yes, there's a lot of freedoms that are built into the law, but there's a very accosting element to certain cultures where maybe your schedule or your way of interacting with people, maybe you're a little loud, or maybe you're a little introverted and you don't like an extroverted culture. These things are present and they're hiding in your travel destinations, but you won't notice them if you're only there for 10 days. You need 100%. To sit in the, you need to. And so, like, for example, in Western Europe, I never realized how much I detested not being able to order food after 8 o'clock, because in Turkey, things are open 24/7. In the Emirates or in the Gulf, you're walking around 3 a.m. There's freshly cooked food. There's karak tea. There's all kinds of stuff. So these are the little parts of just what I call the study of reality, or the study of what is life. You cannot fully embody them until you are surrounded by other people who are experiencing something different than the way you grew up.
100%. I mean, when I lived in Abu Dhabi, my wife and I would go to the movies. We'd catch the late night showing. It would be like 11:30, 12 o'clock. Start, not finish, start the movie at that time. And then afterwards, we'd go and get Indian food at 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, and the place would be packed. They would absolutely go get some chicken biryani and a vindaloo or something like that, and we'd have, and then we'd come back. I mean, when I started having kids, okay, kids kind of modify our schedule, but traditionally I was more of a late night person. And considering a lot of my clients are North American based, and I was on that time zone, it was very normal for me to go to bed at 3, 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning and then sleep until noon. It's one of the reasons I moved to Latin America to be back on this time zone. But the same type of thing, Istanbul, that city never sleeps. Like, I would make a strong argument that if you look at any of the world cities, the big cosmopolitan world cities, Istanbul is where it's at. Like that's what, like 18 million people, 20, 22 million people, something like that. It's how many?
We estimate, my personal estimate is around the 25 million. There are a lot of people who are in the metro area that are not considered Istanbul, but are part of, but you're right. It is the most 20. I mean, in my experience, it's probably up there with most 24-hour cities in the world.
Yep. And it's just so wild. There's people on the street. There's people going for tea and coffee. You can go out for restaurants. There's just so much going on. And it's just fun and lively. I mean, the only thing I can say about Istanbul is it's almost too much stimulation in that city. Like, there is always so much going on, so many people, at least where I stay in Nishantashé. I mean, you're over on the Asian side. I can't speak as much to the Asian side, but on the European side, like, it's crazy over there. And if you're near Taksim or anything, holy moly.
Well, that was part of the reason. So I lived in Taksim Square for the first year, which I think everybody should start on that side, and get to know the culture. I think a lot of folks who are long-term Istanbul, they start to move towards the Asian side, towards more residential areas. I lived right by the coast and it was very quiet.
Yep.
I'm also a little bit of a high-rise wonk, so I love a tall building where I don't hear street noise. And one of the ways, interesting word to the wise for folks who love big cities like myself, the way to stay sane in a big city is to stay on a high floor and to ascend into a little cloud at the end of the day, not hear any noise, do your work, and then redescend into the excitement. And that was kind of a fun duality that I enjoyed playing with in Turkey. And I've also in New York, when I lived in New York, same thing. I mean, again, some cities don't have high rises or it's just not the preference. But I really liked how Istanbul had that duality. And I liked how Istanbul is a city of two continents. I mean, it really is unique in that sense. And people should certainly take that opportunity to see that, because it doesn't exist anymore. That level of the spectrum of craziness, the spectrum of quietness, or conservatism, secularism. I mean, there's one of the reasons I chose that originally and I lived in Turkey I've been going to Turkey for about 6 years. I would say collectively, if you added up all the months that I spent there, it probably amounted to about 4 years. I've actually recently given up my place there and I'm back on the road full time, not because I don't love Istanbul, but just I needed, like you said, sometimes you need a break. Sometimes, I mean, it was very chaotic. It's a little hard to get work done there. It's also hard to avoid the temptations of all the delightful sweets and other things that are, it's not a weight loss destination. So it's definitely like a fun, exciting place. I think it's a great place for people to spend their 20s in if they're solo. I think it is a surprisingly actually good place, at least in the outer parts as well. Even to raise kids, it's very safe. It's a low crime city. So there's so many great things about Istanbul. But anyway, just it is a great example of how does your city affect your behaviors and affect your energy, and where in the world could you go where those things align with maybe something you're aspirationally trying to activate. Maybe you're trying to be more social. You don't, like, one of my greatest complaints, particularly in North America, especially when I'm in Canada, is nobody really talks to each other. Maybe on the supermarket line, maybe you can, strike up conversation. It's not that people are unfriendly. It's just that culture does not foster new social interactions by any degree comparable to something like Turkey, where you can really, you can make friends in an afternoon. I mean, you can, and it's that type of vibe. And Latin America, very similar. I mean, these are cultures where people embrace foreigners. They embrace people who are curious or people who want to share food or go somewhere, share stories, that type of thing. So I think the number one thing is maybe the place you're selecting to spend more time in is aligned with the world and the person that you want to be more.
Absolutely. And I think that you've actually touched on a couple of really important parts there. First one to come to mind is that actually a place like Istanbul is so walkable, which just is awesome to me. Like if I think back to Canada, like where I grew up, where I've traveled extensively in the United States, I mean, there's very few walkable cities where you can't have a car, right? Like I like being able to walk. Okay, it's very hilly in Istanbul, that's for sure. But you can go downstairs into the cafe and then walk to the restaurant and then take the kids to the park and then go over there and get ice cream and then go do some shopping and then come back and then like everything is so accessible, which I think is amazing. And then even if it is a little bit far or, the public transport is really, really, really good. Like you can take a ferry over to the Asian side. You can take a ferry anywhere. There's the underground. There's just so much public transport there. So even as a well-to-do individual, as a wealthy individual, I still take all the public transport there. And I think of a place like Panama, which I love and adore Panama. I think it's great. Panama's not really a walkable city. First of all, it's super duper hot year round here. It's very humid. And okay, we use Uber Black, which is very convenient, but the public transport, I mean, no wealthy people are using the public transport. It's really for the working class, domestic help and things like that. In Istanbul, I think anybody and everybody is using the public transport, which is nice to see. So there are differences in that. And then to your other point of trying to find a place that speaks to you, I think sometimes it's interesting to try to find a place which is so different than your normal life. Like Panama and Istanbul have nothing to do with each other. For me, besides the fact that I like both of them, I chose them because there's direct flights, Turkish Airlines, business class with a flat bed, 13 and a half hours to Istanbul, 10 flights a week back and forth. This is awesome. When I go to Istanbul, I go there for a month or 2 months or something. And it's like, so different than my normal life that I get like my fill, I scratch an itch in, of things that I want to see and this excitement. And then I come back to Panama and it's a bit more relaxed and I've got my normal life and the kids' activities and, I can just fall back into the group for a little bit. And then when we want to excitement, go back there again so picking kind of contrarian plays, as you had said before, or differences, places that are not the same, I think is the spice of life, let's say.
And I like to always add a dimension of personal growth, or for lack of a better word, there is a spirituality element, I think, to travel, where you start to see it less as, for example, you can analyze a place by very objective measures like, what is the cost of living, or what are the consumer services, like how's the restaurant service? I mean, and I have plenty of opinions on different countries in those categories. I think it's fun to analyze. I think there's nothing wrong with enjoying the very physical and tangible things in life. But there's also this element of this international strategy space where it's like, at a certain point, especially after the beginning, certain explorations have been done. Maybe people have, settled in certain places. If you don't make this an adventure of growth and challenge, it's going to get really old fast, because at a certain time, you may just realize, especially as the world globalizes more, especially if, for example, if you're a monolingual English speaker and you just happen to find yourself in places that are English speaking, there's going to be a certain monotony to it after a period. For example, and I see this a lot in Europe, I see it a lot in North America. All the downtowns look the same. All the chains are there. All the same types of foods are present. I mean, some things are nice that are global. We all love Airbnb and Uber. These are safety things. These, they facilitate payments. Okay, I get that. But then at a certain point, if it's not a variety that you enjoy, and if you don't enjoy the challenge, it's like, if you can't handle the heat, step out of the kitchen. Nobody's forcing anybody to do, and at a certain point, international lifestyle, if you're not doing it for your own growth and, contributing to this environment of curiosity, it's like, just stay home and, go to Miami or something. It's like, it has to be, I see, I'm not a big fan of Miami. So it's like, to me, it's like, there's just the decay of this kind of consumer, I mean, there's great things about it, but these types of cities where people just in North America, or even New York, I think is so past its prime. These types of cities where everyone thought that this was the best the world could offer. If you don't want a little bit of, if you're not willing to put up with certain hiccups in the journey, or if you really need everybody and everything around you to agree with everything you believe, and you don't, like, for example, so many of these Westerners get so fussed when they see a woman in a hijab. They just can't handle that there are people who don't share their beliefs. Some people are not feminists. Some people don't think that we need transgender flags flying from every building. Some people don't think that we need to send more of our tax dollars to Ukraine to put 21-year-old Ukrainian soldiers through the meat grinder. Some of us don't need to, see that, like in Germany or, whatever. I'm picking certain hot button topics, but there are places on this planet where people do not operate and do not wish to operate the way that you may have been accustomed to in your life. And that exciting challenge is the moment at which I think it's the mice and the men. It's like, do you really want to know what's on this planet or not? and that is the invitation to people to really be curious and to lean in and to also know their limits. I mean, nobody's suggesting that you have to discard everything you love or every comfort you love. But if you're not willing to, at the very least, test things, then it's probably just best to stay in Ontario.
For sure. I mean, sometimes I've thought about, like, okay, what's my superpower? Like, what is my superpower in the world? Why am I different? Why have I been able to do these things? It's like, I get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Like, I am super okay with not speaking the language and have no idea where I'm going to go or where I'm going to eat or what's going on. And every time things are like, super easy going, and like, this is boring. I got to do something, And people are like, oh, enjoy it while you're young, because when you get married, you're not going to be able to do it. Well, I got married and my wife feels the same. She loves traveling. Oh, enjoy it now while you can, because when you have kids, you're not going to be able to do it. All right. I got 3 kids. My daughter's been to 20 countries now. She's been raised on the road, going to many places, speaks multiple languages. And, that has been a rich learning environment for her, going through these different countries. And understanding other people's perspective from the world is so fascinating. Like, why do you eat these types of foods? Why is it this your culture? Why is this the religion? What is the history? How did these things come together? This shaping, we kind of, as Westerners, we believe, Western society, specifically Americans, American society or American and Canadian society is the best. And we are at the epitome of everything like that. And there's 193 countries out there in the world. And it's like, there's like 5 countries which are good and free and right and just. And the rest of the world is a jungle. And it's like, that is not even remotely correct at all. And for someone who spent his entire life traveling and going to a lot of the places that other people don't want to go to, I can tell you that people are the same. And there's just, there's so many things that make us similar, but, there's not only one way to view the world. And uncovering those things and being uncomfortable going through it is richness, builds character and develops you as a human being. And it's just like, go out there and experience things. Don't assume that we know the best way to do things, because to be honest, we don't.
Yes.
Like in the majority of the cases, we don't. So it's super interesting, these things.
That humility element, I mean, I think one of the things I encourage people to focus on is if you look at the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and the other countries that have joined that bloc, what that to me is, it's not some military alliance. It's not just an economic statistic. This is a movement of the larger countries of the world that have moved on from the hegemony of, for example, European or American military power or economic power. You have countries that are, the leaders in production. They're the leaders in commodities and these types of more tangible economies that are going to shape our future, that are currently shaping our future. And so what I encourage people to do is start taking them more seriously. For example, people will often say, well, I could never want, like, why would I want a Turkish passport? For example, there's a citizenship by investment program in Turkey, very popular, most popular program in the history of citizenship by investment. And it has attracted, of course, usual regional suspects, people from, Iran and countries that really have very weak passports. Okay, that is a majority of the buyers of that program. However, there is also a new generation of people that are beginning to see that freedom is not just what is supposedly espoused on certain documents or a certain Western conception of what is, what are human rights or what are freedoms. There's also soft freedoms. There's also things that are in between the lines. There's also things that cultures protect. For example, during COVID, we all learned what authoritarianism looks like in the West. And there were countries that were supposedly, countries that I was told I'd be thrown in a burned lap bag on arrival. And, and I'm out at 2 a.m, mid 2020, eating hummus in Cairo, living my free life. And I'm saying to myself, if this is the only show in town, I'm willing and able to do this if this is what freedom will look like for me. And, we who knew at that point how long that would be, right? So taking them as serious counterparts and not as novelties. This is not, for example, when I talk about older civilization, this is not some Orientalist view that the world is this fascinating museum but we all know we're all going to go back home to London at the end and do our serious work. No, no. This is engaging with the reality of our planet. There are more people in India and China alone, that circle, we've all seen that map, half of the world's population lives in that radius. This is the real condition of the majority of humanity. And let's, as explorers, as people who are investors, let's start seeing that not as a novelty, not as something to just maybe do, but as the predominant determinant of our economic future. Have a foot in each camp. Have the ability to feel comfortable in those regions. And because guess what, whether you like it or not, this is the state of our global economy. And the quicker that folks in the West, particularly in the US, the quicker that they catch on to that, it's going to make a lot more sense why things happen in the world. Why are there conflicts? You're not going to get those answers inside of that bubble. You're going to need to see the context from on the ground.
Well, one of the themes that I've been talking about a lot, not just in this podcast, but in our private membership area or with my private clients, is these walls that are going up around the world, these different spheres of influence. I would put Turkey in one, obviously Russia, China, different regions like this that are not just about those countries, but they're about the region, the history, and that area that surrounds them, and how important it is to have, a home, a residency, a bank account, a suitcase with some clothing, some things over there, so that if something happens back home, you're not just having more of the same. When we do plan Bs and backup plans for clients, sometimes people come to me and they're like, yeah, I'm great. I've got my US passport and my Mexican residency in my back pocket and my Costa Rican residency. I'm like, amazing. You have three of the same thing. Like, that is absolutely three of the same, right? But if you had, okay, your US, your Turkish, a Nigerian residency, and a Thailand elite visa or something like that, it's like, whoa, now you're looking at pretty different types of spheres of influence. And what is the pressure from one country on another? What are they going to be able to do? What is the sharing of information and the exchange? What does that look like from a culture, from a linguistic standpoint? There is more than just a north to south, which I love. A north to south. I spend a lot of north to south between Canada, North America, Central America, Caribbean, and South America. But I think having options available to you on the other side of the world is really important in our work these days, like super, super duper important. You don't want everything the same. You want contrarian things. You want different things. You don't want things that are always going to be the same, because if you get into trouble, it's actually not going to do you any good.
And also, yeah, these countries that were seen as bad apples, it's like bad apples according to who? Bad apples according to the people starting all the wars. I'm okay with that. So it's like, like count me in for whoever is, count me in for the country with the largest manufacturing sector and economy in the world that has not dropped a single bomb on anybody in my recent memory. So, like starting to really reconstruct your idea of what constitutes development. For example, is investment in infrastructure development, or is investment in gender studies classes in Afghanistan development? I don't know. I prefer trains and roads. Yeah. I prefer airports. I prefer, so it's like, these are the questions, and there is that movement. People are waking up, and folks who, listening to the show, these are the people who are wanting to understand what the field looks like out there. And I would say particularly to Turkey, to Middle East, to the Gulf, these are places that are, the water's fine. Come on in. I think Asia continues to have really exciting destinations. I have my eye right now on Indonesia. I have my eye right now on I'm going back to India again. I really love spending time. I think India is actually a very underrated destination, particularly for, you can get a lot for your money and you can live very, very well. And the food is just, another level, as you've already alluded 100%. To. So yeah, so those are my thoughts. And I really, looking forward to seeing what this decade includes. The rest of by 2030, I think again, it's going to be a whole different landscape.
Well, I remember when I was over to visit you in Istanbul, maybe not last time, but the time before, and I told you, oh, I'm headed over to Azerbaijan with my family. And I did. I went to Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan with me, my wife, two kids at that time. We've now had another one, my mother, and our nanny. And you're like, yeah, I've been to Azerbaijan, and it's a place that I'm keeping my pulse on, and it's an interesting place. And, kind of watching what they're doing. And it's true. I mean, when you live in a place like Istanbul, Azerbaijan is your next door neighbor. Like it is right there. It is super, random if you're coming from, Canada or the States, but in that region, it's an hour and a half, 2 hour flight, something like that. You can pop over for a long weekend and go and check it out. And I like the accessibility to countries that you wouldn't normally go to, and to have a little bit of exposure to these types of countries, because some places in these regions are doing really exciting things. And it's like, from an investor's standpoint or from a lifestyle standpoint, there can be a lot to be said for that.
Absolutely. Agree.
Okay, so we've been talking a lot about, your perspective over the last decade of traveling and a lot of time spent in Istanbul and in Turkey in general. But I mean, you've left there now. What is on the horizon? What are the new places? What are the places that you want to go explore, or the places that you've been to in that region, but you want to go back to and check out again? I'm kind of curious about what the future holds for Brian.
Yeah, so I've decided to really lean into my theme of the BRICS countries. I think this year I may hopefully touch all 5 of the key members. There's also a lot of other new members that I'll be in Saudi later this year. I'll be in India again. I'm looking to apply, hopefully to be able to visit Moscow as well. I'll be back in China. I was in China for the New Year, which was really cool. And I'll be in Brazil for a few months coming up this summer. I like to avoid the heat, so I'll be there for the off season. And I'm here in Cape Town. Been here for about a month. Cape Town is, to me, one of the best cities in the world, easily one of my top 5. Really, there's no equivalent in that category. It just has its own flair. It's a fabulous English-speaking environment, amazing value for money, a little bit of a safety element, but where isn't there a safety element at this point? It's not like Philadelphia, Baltimore, and New York are that great either. So, people worry so much about Cape Town. At least the criminals have logic in this country. So I don't worry about South Africa, as long as you know kind of where to hang and where to just kind of assess risk. It's a fabulous environment, beautiful weather, excellent fresh cuisine. So my focus and theme for the next 18 months is going to be semi-nomadic. I may decide to return to Turkey. I already kind of miss it, if I'm honest with you. There's certain places that just keep your heart gripped with those memories. So I mean, to me, Istanbul will always be part of my life. Just doing a little bit of rounds around the region. I'll be in a little bit of Africa early next year. I'm hoping to check out Lagos and Abidjan in Cote d'Ivoire. Those are some of my cities on my list. I will also hopefully be doing more Indonesia and Southeast Asia. I haven't been there since before COVID. I did a lot of time in Malaysia, but like to see them kind of half a decade later, see where those cities are at. So that's my theme over the next year, and really looking forward to rediscovering that kind of medium-term travel and finding my new bases.
Amazing. Well, if you've not been to Nigeria before, it's very interesting. And if you start studying about it and looking about the economics and the growing tech sector and the new cities and real estate that's being built there, I've been there a few times over the last decade, and it is a pretty wild place. And so you're in for a treat. I mean, it's still rough around the edges. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it's not there yet. But if you're looking at emerging market type of things, Nigeria is a super, super interesting one. Another one in Africa that I've recently invested in is the Gambia. I bought a home in the Gambia and doing a lot of research on that, Western Africa, and trying to, understand better about Western Africa. So those are all regions that are, not primary destinations for me right now, but definitely things that I'm testing out and figuring out. And then if things work, then I start to bring some of these new ideas into my private consulting that we do at expatmoney.com. But those sound like some really exciting places that you're going to go to. And I'm super jealous that you're going to Saudi Arabia after living with a border with Saudi for almost a decade and it being impossible to go there. And then the year that I left, they opened up their tourist visa. I'm quite jealous about that.
It'll be good. Looking forward to it.
Amazing. Well, Brian, love the conversation. Super, super interesting. If my audience wants to get a hold of you, if they want to find out more about what you do, where can we send them?
So check out my socials. My Twitter is at Greco Global, Greco, and the word global. And on Instagram, I share a lot of destination tips and photos. I love to take pictures of different restaurants and cities. So my Instagram is brian.world, Brian.world. And then, of course, LinkedIn, folks can reach out. Brian Greco, happy to share words to the wise from the road and connect with people out there. So thanks so much for having me.
Pleasure's all mine. Brian, thank you so much. And I'll talk to you soon. Okay.
Thank you.